Hi, my name is Ashley Johnson, and I am presenting on the idea of human sex trafficking, especially in regards to minors in America. So, what is human trafficking? So, human trafficking is obviously the illegal business of selling. Fuck. Oops. Mhm. Hi, my name is Ashley Johnson, and I'm presenting on the idea of human sex trafficking, especially in regards to minors in America. So, what is human trafficking? In order to create an understanding of how this occurs and what policies and practice are in use, it's first really important to understand what human trafficking actually is. So, though there's a glamorization of and like a Hollywood view of what human trafficking really is, and don't get me wrong, this can definitely be the way that it can occur. It's not always the way Liam Neeson describes it in movies like Wanted. So, the reality is unfortunately much more depressing because it's so much more realistic. In communities around the country, there are men, women, and children that are exploited on a daily basis for money, labor, services, and even sex. This can occur in both cities as well as in rural areas. Around the world, it's an over $32 billion a year industry. So human trafficking is obviously the illegal business of selling services of labor, other services, or commercial sex through coercion of both minors and as well as those that are of age. So this can be done in a multitude of ways. It can be done with threats of harm, kidnapping, things of that nature, but usually it's done in a sense that is much more subtle. Um, it can be done with abuse, but others manners such as coercion, promises of affection, material objects, financial stability, and those are things that a lot of people feel that they need in order to survive. So currently, right now, it's thought to be about 30 million people worldwide, and over 15,000 just in America are active victims of human trafficking at this moment in time. And as I said before, human trafficking realm consists of like not only women that many people think of young women happening to, but it also consists of men, women, girls, and boys of all ages, races, socioeconomic statuses. So childhood sex trafficking. It occurs more than believed, and the sex trafficking industry is really no exception. So there's a company and it's called, or an organization, I'm sorry, that's called Shared Hope International. It's a nonprofit organization that works with those that are privileged, and they define sex trafficking as sex trafficking occurs when someone uses force, fraud, or coercion to cause a commercial sex act with an adult and causes a minor to commit a commercial sex act. The stigma of child sex trafficking is that of immigrants around the world being caught up in it, not boys and girls of all ages, not the people that live next door, children of people that you work with, people that are in schools, but it is. And unfortunately, 70% of victims who are trafficked are suicidal following rescue, if they make it that far. Right now, the thought statistic is that if you stay in sex trafficking, your lifespan is about 7 years. So did you know it can happen anywhere? It can happen in restaurants, strip clubs, hotels, farms, and even personal homes. So trafficking in the United States is a lot like around the world, but it occurs more in U.S. than originally realized. So there's a company called Polaris, and they do the thing called the Polaris Project. And in 2017 alone, Polaris stated that there were over 6,000 cases of trafficking reported in America. And there has been documented reports of human trafficking in all 50 states. So though each state seems to have designated their own laws, in 2000, the first human trafficking law was passed through the House and the Senate. The frustration with this is that each state has an age of limitation for being able to consent to sex. Because of this, there's not continuity, and with the internet being such a readily available source, it becomes even more widespread. So another problem is the First Amendment with the freedom of speech and the Communication Decency Act, or the CDA, because it's hindered a lot of the criminal justice system in criminalizing and persecuting a lot of these crimes. So there really has been, from 2000 to now, been an improvement on the way we deal with human trafficking in the U.S., but Cardenas points out we still have primarily viewed trafficking as a criminal issue rather than a social justice one. So instead of we feel like we're dealing more with the symptoms than really the root cause. So one of the big acts that have just occurred in 2015, pretty recently, is the Stop Advertising Victims of Exploitation Act of 2015. So the SAVE Act. So it's become a protection for victims, not only the actual physical side, but also on the internet, because they are trying to criminalize the Johns, not just the people who are exploiting them. So some of the risk factors. Greenbaum, Young, and Todres, they describe some of the various risk factors for child sex trafficking. We can look at it from all facets of the victim's life. So first is from the individual level, illicit use of substances. That's obviously because in that state, you're more willing, unfortunately, to be in a position to do something that you wouldn't normally feel are your beliefs and values, whether it's because you're high, whether it's because you're trying to obtain drugs, whether you're coming down from drugs, or just being put in that situation. Another is being a sexual minority, being a racial minority, and also having untreated mental or physical disabilities. And a lot of that comes with the idea of mental disabilities with illicit substances. A lot of people self-medicate at this point in time. As someone who works in the drug and alcohol realm, we see this a lot. We see this with a lot of patients that come in that have self-medicated, and They started out because they felt depressed. They started taking medication. Their doctors haven't really followed up on it, and unfortunately there's plenty of times where it snowballs into something where there's an active heroin addiction. So there's also family factors, substance abuse in the family, being part of a migrated family, living in poverty, already being involved in child and youth, and just a violent or abusive family structure. So these can all create situations where the child might not feel loved, might not feel like they have affection or they have a safe place. So it's very easy, because they're much more vulnerable, to be able to be coerced into a situation where they can be sex trafficked. So the community factors is having a history of violence that in the community, lack of resources, a low education level, natural disasters, and really desensitization of trafficking. So like lack of resources, if you're not understanding or educated on the idea of trafficking, you may not even feel as a victim in it that it's something that occurs, or that you're even being trafficked, which, obviously comes with a low education level. Natural disasters, people being displaced, it's much easier when people are kind of transient to be in that situation. And in general, societal factors, so systematic inequality, belief that children need to work to assist a family, and that's a very cultural thing. There are many communities within the American culture that have been brought through other countries and migration, that the idea that children should work to assist the family, that it isn't their job just to go to school, but it's their job to also help them. So that can cause a problem. And also objectification and sexualization of females it makes women, unfortunately, the self-esteem factor comes into play. We've sexualized women in a point where it's not taboo to have people naked on TV and to have this situation. So it really can cause this barrier between, causes this gray line between, whether it's sex trafficking or whether it's empowering. And a lot of children, and even females, adult females, and men and boys, can feel that they're not really sure what side of the line they're on. So, within literature review, some of the literature that is around, Higgins and Brady in 2012 wrote a piece about child sex trafficking in particular, and really just talking about the first real legislation that was passed federally, the Trafficking Victim Violence Prevention Act, and just realizing that hasn't become something that's really made headlines, and it's not something that's really been made a priority until very recently. But in 2000 it did create a basis for criminalization of perpetrators. So right now, Higgins and Brady expressed there's still an unfortunate supply and demand of this type of criminal activity, so it's been really hard to break down that barrier. And a frustrating part of the fact is, even though it's been updated, the funds that our federal government has given to being able to utilize resources hasn't been updated. So there's this big disparity between wanting to assist and not even having the resources to be able to. So it's kind of tied a lot of people's hand in that sense. So Reed et al. Talked about childhood sex trafficking in Florida. Unfortunately, Florida has come a breeding ground in the sense of, with the transient different cultures and things, it's just become very enmeshed. And there's unfortunately a very high rate of childhood sex trafficking. So one study that's done, they describe how important it is to utilize tools in order to create a net to assist victims by understanding the resources and like the risk factors. So they used the adverse childhood experience scoring program, and they kind of used like 6 sections of it to see if there was really a correlation between traumatic events in children's lives and then the probability of being a victim of child sex trafficking. And sexual abuse, they found, was a huge vulnerability, and it showed significant results in the higher probability of becoming a victim.